Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The IMHE model that has received so much attention and been profiled by Doctors Birx and Fauci, the Washington Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, their model of infections and COVID-19 related deaths. A paper by statisticians from CTDS, Center for Translational Data Science, Northwestern University, and the University of Texas finds in excess of 70% of U.S. states had actual death rates falling outside the 95% prediction interval for that state. This is in assessing the model. 70%, more than two-thirds of U.S. states had actual death rates falling outside the 95% prediction interval. Then this. The ability of the model to make accurate predictions decreases with increasing amounts of data.
Right.
What do you mean, right?
Wait, the more data you have, the lower. What are you saying?
The accuracy decreases.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Now IHME is forecasting U.S. deaths for July and August.
What?
0. Now they're going all the way the other way. From the IHME, our forecast of 0 deaths in July and August assume appropriate measures are put in place to guard against the reintroduction of COVID-19 from another state or country. These measures may include mass screening, may include mass screening, contact tracing, testing of all individuals entering the country, quarantine of people who test positive. Well, that's a whole set of assumptions. And another assumption implicit that those measures are implemented flawlessly. It would be, borderline comical if life and death decisions weren't being predicated on these sorts of models and their predictions.
And people's mental health. I mean, remember when they came out and they said 2 million Americans are going to die?
So that
My
was
mom almost had a heart attack.
That
honestly.
was the Imperial College London
Right.
model.
And then they regrouped, so to speak.
That was revised down to fewer than 20,000. And speaking of that, I mean, again, just in terms of any track record that may be of interest to people with respect to some of these modelers who were given expert status, whose numbers, and I'm not saying that they were saying that these numbers aren't predicated on certain assumptions that, if those assumptions don't come to fruition, radically alter the accuracy of the models. I'm saying the press coverage has been awful. And Imperial College of London is probably at the top of the list of awful coverage. Neil Ferguson, who's an epidemiologist and professor of mathematical biology, the gold standard of disease modeling, according to some. Looking back, ex-newspaperman Bill Steigerwald, who actually did some of the assessment of track record, Ferguson has a record of making worst-case predictions about the threat of new viruses. For example, in 2005, about the avian flu death toll, this is from The Guardian. Last month, 2005, Neil Ferguson, professor of mathematical biology at Imperial College London, told Guardian Unlimited that up to 200 million people could be killed by the avian flu. Quoting him, around 40 million people died in 1918 Spanish flu outbreak. There are 6 times more people on the planet, so you could scale it up to around 200 million people probably. A Department of Health contingency plan states anywhere that there could be between 21,500 and 709,000 deaths in Britain. The bird flu's death toll from 2003 to 2020 is 455.
455?
Mm-hmm. 21.5 to 700,000 in Britain, 200 million people worldwide. In Britain, the death toll over the last 17 years is 455.
It's a big difference. And you can't compare 1918 to 2020.
The point is the accuracy
different
of the
healthcare
models
systems. Right, the
in real
models are
time
messed up.
that policymakers are making decisions predicated upon. And there just is not, you give whatever deference you want to give to the modelers and their assumptions. Give all of the qualifiers and caveats that you want. The reporting on this is awful. Anything with a number, the press corps turns and just repeats as received wisdom that was handed to them on tablets. And so
I know
perhaps
it's
we're
sick.
going to
It's
find after the fact that some horrific decisions were made, horrific decisions that cost lives.
Mhm.
For more on this whole topic, Gary, we're pleased to be joined by Peter Mohler, a PhD, he's Vice Dean for Research at Ohio State College of Medicine, Director of the Dorothy M. Davis Heart and Lung Research Center. And he's got some good news about something going on at Ohio State that the FDA approved. Peter Mohler, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, thanks for having me this morning.
Before we get to the good news about what your colleagues at Ohio State have developed with respect to testing, I mean, do you have any comment you'd like to make about the modeling and the modeling being used as these basis for these decisions that we've made?
Yeah, so I think for a lot of the scientists and researchers that we're kind of living in the real world of what's happening day to day, and seeing people on the front lines that are that hour by hour and minute by minute are worried, are concerned. And so while I know that there are a lot of models out there, a lot of us, and I can speak for my colleagues here in Columbus as well as probably in Chicago, that we're trying to work on solutions. And so while I know there's a lot of hypotheticals out there, and models are great, but models are as good as the data that are in them, we really don't have time to spend a lot of time on that, because we're focused on coming up with solutions and coming up with whether they're new ways to test or new therapies or new drugs. We just need to get some answers.
Well, what are you and your colleagues working on right now at Ohio State?
Yeah,
Some treatments or solutions?
Yeah, so I think we've heard a lot about playing defense against the virus, and that gets into this idea of testing. And we've come up with a lot of ways to be able to not only expand the tests, to make them faster, to make them more accurate. But one of the things that you don't hear about on the testing side that is a downstream is how we're able to get to understand the virus a little bit better, to be able to understand how it might react differently in one person and to another, to be able to understand what are the best ways to fight it, to come up with therapies that really can combat it on the front lines, and then ultimately to put these things forward where we're going to be able to have antivirals over the next hopefully the next year, to be able to really defend against this, and so we can really get everybody back to a little bit more normalcy.
Speaking of looking at the virus and understanding how it operates, so how best to combat it, there was this study out. Now, again, this is out of Wuhan, China, but a study out on Friday that looked at the symptoms of a couple of hundred COVID-19 patients, finding nearly half with severe cases of the virus had neurological issues, dizziness, headaches, impaired consciousness. Is that an area of research that you or your colleagues have delved into? And if that's true, or if you've seen similar symptoms, does that tell us anything about the nature of it?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and again, one of the things that America is very good at is we've got some amazing researchers, and we've got great physicians. And so, for example, right now at Ohio State, we have about 80 different active research studies focused on COVID-19, and that's looking at everything from the impact of the virus on the lungs, the impact of the virus on the heart, and like you mentioned a little bit before, Dan, what's happening in the brain. And what we're seeing is that depending on what some of the other phenotypes or the other sort of problems that someone might have, and that might be diabetes, it might be they might have obesity, that might be their age. We're seeing a little bit different manifestation in terms of the symptoms and then the outcome. One of the things that Amy brought up is what's new is happening is what we're trying to figure out is that when a virus interacts with someone else, a human's body, what are the things that happens not only in terms of their genetics, but what happens in terms of what we call the epigenetics, or sort of the frosting on the top of the genes that might change that might lead not only to a different downstream clinical phenotype, but also may lead to a different way to treat those people. So I will tell you, whether it's in, again, Columbus or Chicago or San Francisco or New York, there are a lot of researchers today that are working 18 hours a day to really get solutions so we can get back to normal.
But does COVID mainly affect your lungs, and is that why a number of obese people are dying, because of that extra pressure on their lungs, that extra weight?
Right. Well, certainly COVID has a big impact on the lungs, and I think this has been documented, whether it's in the Chinese literature or our literature here in the United States. But a lot of the things that happen with COVID move beyond the lungs. And so, for example, we're learning that as the virus moves past the lungs into the heart, there's this disease called myocarditis, where we start to see fibrosis and some things that happen in the heart. So it's very important that while we study the lungs in depth, that we really we're able to understand what's happening in some of the other organs, which are really critical.
You mentioned therapeutics, and I wonder if you and your colleagues are involved in any clinical trials for any of the potential antivirals that have been widely discussed, from remdesivir to the convalescent plasma.
Yeah, we are. It's and again, it's something that we've really been active in, and want to make sure that there's a lot of people right now talking about what to do, that we want to be coming up with ways to fix this, right? And so whether that's some of the work that everyone has heard on about hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, or some of the other things that look at cytokines, or even some new drugs that we're taking on that might be used for another treatment right now, whether it's a cancer treatment or a cardiovascular treatment, and be able to repurpose it for COVID. Again, lots and lots of trials that are happening today.
Do you have any time horizon on the completion of some of those trials?
Well, so they're very active, and in fact, here at Ohio State, we started doing some of this work on convalescent plasma. And as your listeners probably know very well, this is the idea where we take the plasma from someone who has gone through the disease and has come out in a very good state, and take some of the antibodies that are in their blood and then put them back into someone that might have a more severe outcome. And we're starting to see results from that in real time, and we're one of many groups across the country that are looking at this. The other thing that I think that is important for your listeners to understand is coming up with ways that we're able to understand the spread of disease across larger populations, and working on tests that are going to allow us to be able to look for these antibodies, these neutralizing antibodies against the virus, to be able to understand kind of where the hot spots in the population, so we can really work on getting life back to a little bit more normal.
Do you think everyone should be tested?
Well, right now, we don't.
Antibody test or an active COVID test.
So I think what we would say at this point is that it's important that we get that antibody test correct, and some of the things that it sounds like you've spent a lot of time reading, is that we don't necessarily yet know that if someone has an antibody to COVID today, will that stick around? Will that immunity stick around for many months or many years? And so I think that's important to know. We want to make sure that the antibody tests are specific for this COVID virus. And so those are the sorts of things that our labs here at Ohio State and labs around the world are working on today. But once we have those, absolutely, we want to make sure that we can test as many people as appropriate.
Now, I assume by law in Ohio, you're not allowed to talk to researchers at the University of Michigan. But with respect to perhaps other colleagues, like those researchers at Pittsburgh that have a vaccine under development that's gotten some attention, are you in consultation and collaboration with researchers doing some of the same things you're doing, maybe taking some different angles of incidence into the whole area of antivirals as well as a possible vaccine?
Yeah, Dan, I think you would be really proud of how, it doesn't matter what Big Ten group you're for,
even
or
Michigan?
what.
I mean, come on,
well, with the
Michigan,
exception of
man.
maybe Michigan.
Yeah, right.
But there's a lot of things that while we may root for different football teams, that those colors go away when you start to think about what's being impacted. the numbers in Illinois are around 800. That you stop caring a little bit as much about loyalties, and really it's been really impressive about how scientists and physicians have been sharing information across what typically are competitive, healthy but competitive competitions in terms of normal research. People that normally would fight for intellectual property are sharing it very freely, and to really, like you say, to get to solutions. That it's, we've talked a lot. We need to be able to create solutions.
He is Peter Mohler. He's PhD. He's the Vice Dean for Research at Ohio State College of Medicine and Director of the Dorothy M. Davis Heart and Lung Research Institute. And you've heard what he said about this FDA-approved test that they've developed at Ohio State. We'll tweet out the release on that. Peter Mohler, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me this morning.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. President Trump says he will decide when to reopen the economy, and the federal government may end up owing 3% of American Airlines. Those stories next.
If you're one of the millions of Americans desperate to